Okay, now let's change gears to this salary cap discussion. Okay, so 1057 The Fan, who, just to be clear, I love it, was just on their morning show. What was it? Friday, something like that. Was on there last week. Had a great time with Rob Long and those guys on the morning crew. But in a later, I think he's in the afternoon show with Jason La Canfora, Ken Wiseman, and Tim. How do you say Tim's last name?
Tim's my guy, Tim Barbalace. We came into radio together in Baltimore. So
Okay.
it's Tim, Ken, and Jason. They do Inside Access. Inside Access,
Okay.
and that is the afternoon drive time show. Yep.
Okay, gotcha. Well, last Friday, I believe, they were going through an exercise of comparing cash spending. Okay, different from cap spending. So obviously, you have to have money work underneath a cap, but you can finagle it year to year by restructuring and this and that. And so at the end, so really, a lot of people like to look at how much cash you're actually putting out every year. But that's kind of finagled too. That's what people don't understand. And I remember listening to Dick Cass, former Ravens president. He talked about how what you want to do is check over a 5-year period how much cash people are spending, and then you get a pretty good idea. And then they are required, I think teams are required to spend like something like 77 or 78% of the cap and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so Jason La Canfora grabbed some numbers from Spot Rack, which doesn't seem to be very accurate. And he went off on the Ravens. And I bring this up because I heard it last week and I was like, this isn't quite right, but whatever, it's radio and kind of move on. But then a lot of the guys at Russell Street Report started pushing back on what Jason La Canfora had said. So why don't we start with this? I'll start with his claims about cash spending, about the Ravens and some other teams. We might pause it here and there. But here's what he had to say and what people are kind of debating on Twitter over the weekend.
We always strive to keep it real around here. So in light of the latest round of grousing and grumbling about a salary cap that is completely malleable and flexible, and one in which if you're willing to spend, you can manipulate in a bunch of different ways. Instead, Eric DeCosta is using it as an opportunity to tamp down expectations, to hide behind the salary cap, to let you know that his owner, who he loves so much, is really, really trying to win here. And boy, if it wasn't for this dastardly salary cap or some of these rules, well, we'd win every year because we're so damn committed. And we already spend as much as we possibly could. That's what they try to tell you. Well, guess who was 27th in the NFL in actual dollars spent on payroll last year? Your Baltimore Ravens. That's 27th out of 32. I'm sorry. The Philadelphia Eagles, who I think they won it all. Remind me, am I wrong about that?
They won it all.
They spent $65 million more than Silent Steve Bisciotti last year. $65 million more. Yet you don't really hear them complaining and crying about the salary cap the way the Baltimore Ravens do. And I would just let you know that Eric DeCosta's boss, he was second in the NFL in spending in 2023. In 2022, they were 21st. In 2021, they were 11th. In 2020, they were 16th. In 2019, they were 17th in spending. In 2018, they were dead last, 32nd. In 2017, they were 23rd. So, yet they have the temerity to cry about a salary cap and to cry about we're so smart for our own good and we've got all these first world problems. We can't pay everybody. No, you could. You choose not to. Last year, the Philadelphia Eagles had 5 players who made $21 million or more. The Ravens had 2. Any wiggle room there? Couldn't have added somebody at the deadline?
They tried, Jason.
Yeah. Philadelphia Eagles had 9 players make $15 million or more. The Ravens had 3. So these are facts. If you don't believe me, just go to Spotrac.com.
Okay. So that's kind of the first part there, Bobby, where he spouted off a lot of numbers. So over the weekend, Brian McFarland, and there's just not. There's nobody more reliable when it comes to the Ravens cap than Brian McFarland. I mean, I'm telling you, even people inside the building are like, holy crap, he's good. Like, he can maybe get a job inside there. Okay.
Lawyer by day, right?
Yes.
To be clear, lawyer by day, Ravens salary cap, unaffiliated, we might add, expert by night.
Yes.
And friend of the show, and a great dude, super, super talented.
And he doesn't get his information from Spot Rack. Okay. Spot Rack, sometimes we'll bring him on. We're in a pinch. Let me give you a general idea of somebody's contract. Okay. But if you want solid numbers, Brian's getting them. Like they are as solid as they can become. Okay. So that tweet over here where they tweeted out this saying the Eagles spent $65 million more than Baltimore last year. And then he says without zero complaints. So I'm going to get to that in just a minute too. So he quote retweets that and says this, and Brian's not a confrontational guy. He just wants to set the record straight. And he says there's so much that is inaccurate here and refuted by actual NFLPA data. He says the Ravens were second in cash spending in 2023. And Jason did admit that in that clip. He got that part right. But they were fifth in 2022. And they were third for 2021, 2022, and 2023 together, outspending Philadelphia each of those years. And you can see it right here, Bobby. So to the right, you can see a spreadsheet of how much the Ravens spent from 2021 to 2023. And they were indeed third over those 3 years. And Philadelphia was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in the top 10. So nothing that, Philadelphia's in the top 10. That's a good amount of spending. Top 10 is perfectly fine if I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan. But the Ravens were number 3 over those 3 years and number 2 in 2023. Brian goes on to say, yes, they were down in 2024, but cash spending is cyclical. And it totally is. Again, I cannot tell you how many times I was like educated while I was in that building where Dick Cass would talk about, you got to look at a 5-year cycle of cash spending. Because yes, you can finagle the salary cap, but the salary cap isn't fake, which is what people want you to say or want you to believe. And so in Ravens fans' minds, or maybe not everybody, but the person that just posted in our chat, the cap is cap. Well, within a 5-year period, you can fluff it up and play with it. But over time, everybody gets back to kind of neutral. And so you may complain, well, why don't the Ravens take a shot? Well, that's what they did from Eric DeCosta's standpoint in 2023 when he's second in cash spending. And he had just signed Lamar Jackson. But at some point you have to refill the bank accounts, if you will, the cash accounts. And so so Brian says they were down in 2024. So I reached out to Brian. I said, do you have the 2024 numbers? Because he posted receipts, by the way, of the NFLPA putting out everybody's cap spending. And what Jason was saying about being number 27 and 22 or in the late 20s here, that's not true according to NFLPA records. And again, Spot Rack tries, but they're doing it based off of, and they'll say it at the bottom of their things, this is based off of reporting, the best reporting we can find, this and that. But when you're getting it from the Players Association, who knows how much each player is actually getting paid, right? Then it paints two wildly different pictures than the one that Jason just put together. And according to the NFLPA, top 3 over the last 3 years in spending. According to Jason, outside of 2023, you're in the bottom 20s. 2 wildly different sets of numbers here. And he said it. You can go to Spot Rack and look it up, but Spot Rack isn't that as accurate as the NFLPA. And obviously in this case, nowhere near as close. And I'm trying to think here. So here it is. Here he pulled some receipts. Here they were. I just took 2023 right here. Ravens are clearly number 2. The only team that beat them were the Texans. And by the way, the Ravens beat the Texans in 2023 in the divisional round. And you can go and look at it. The cash spending each year doesn't correlate with winning all the time. What more correlates? People being smart with the cap over time and drafting well. That, if you can go look at the numbers, that's what correlates, not the cash spending year in and year out. So I asked Brian, what's the 2024 spending? He said NFLPA hasn't put it out yet. He says they usually do it around this time. He goes, but sometimes they don't do it, but they have been more consistent over the last 3 years. So then after putting out those numbers, unless you have any, do you have any reaction yet, Bobby? Because then
I have a lot.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a lot, but I think you're on a roll.
Are you sure? Because I'm going to change it to what he says about Steve Bisciotti. So I don't know if you have anything yet. If you want to wait,
It'll all be perfect on the back end.
Okay.
It'll summarize what I think has been the demise of Jason as a local broadcaster.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, moving on, he starts to compare who he thinks which owners are more committed to winning than Steve Bisciotti.
Players love Steve.
They do.
You know, because the facility's great and all that.
They think he's committed to winning.
Well, these are the teams that I think have owners that are more committed to winning than Steve Bisciotti in terms of how they fasten their rosters, how they're willing to take on payroll, how quickly they are to extend their own players. Philadelphia Eagles, certainly more committed than the Baltimore Ravens. He spent $65 million in them last year.
Yeah, Howie's very aggressive.
Kansas City?
Yeah.
Does anybody want to argue that? Do you want to have that argument?
Is there an argument?
No. Buffalo Bills? I don't like Jed York. I got a lot of issues with him. I think he's a little bit of a turd. But, like, they've spent money. They've gone for it there. Who went and got Chase Young and took that on at the deadline?
Yeah.
Cleveland. We can say about how misguided he is. He spent $300 million or more like 3 straight years.
Like a moron, though. How many wins he got to show for it?
But was he going for it?
Taking swings. I don't know what he's going for.
Was he all in? Was he committed?
He should be committed.
Did they have Myles Garrett and still get Zadarius Smith?
Are you saying there's a world?
Did they keep their own guys?
Time out. Are you saying there's a world where you think that Haslam's a more committed to winning owner than Steve Bisciotti?
I think we're living in that world.
I don't.
So a couple of things. Cleveland, if he's touting that Steve Bisciotti should be more like Cleveland, I'm not there. And it just goes to show again that if Cleveland was indeed spending the most, and again, I don't know if Jason's numbers are correct. He definitely weren't on the Ravens. But if Cleveland is spending the most, yeah, don't be like Cleveland. Then he talked about how Jed York went out and got Chase Young. What has he done? Why would you give examples that it's like it just shows that you shouldn't just throw around money? Like the Ravens went out and got Kyle Van Noy for way cheaper and he played much better. And people poo-poo that kind of stuff because it's like, oh, well, he's old. You know, and the Ravens went and found a bargain and then he put up double-digit stats. Chase Young didn't do any of that. Then the last one where because he keeps comparing him throughout the two, not only that segment, but they went to commercial, they came back and they did a whole segment on the Philadelphia Eagles. And they kept talking about how Howie does things. Bobby, we pointed this out last week at the Combine. I went back and I listened to Howie Roseman, GM of the Eagles, his entire press conference at the Combine. And do you know what I heard? I heard a GM that sounds a lot like Eric DeCosta. A lot like Eric DeCosta. Zach Berman over in Philadelphia summed up some of the things that Howie said. Said Howie Roseman asked fans for patience while the Eagles put together the roster this offseason. Quote, it may look different. Some of the moves that we may have to make here may not be what are necessarily on other people's minds. It's probably not going to look like maybe the conventional wisdom thinks it should look. I would just ask our fans to just have patience throughout the offseason. The offseason doesn't stop in free agency. The offseason doesn't stop in the draft, meaning I think he's going to be looking for veteran bargains closer to training camp, just like the Ravens often do. And they're going to probably have to do more cuts than they just did with Darius Slay. And so, yes, the Eagles took a big swing, spending a lot of money last year, and they hit. But the Ravens spending the second most the year before went all the way to the AFC Championship game. And can you blame Eric DeCosta for what happened in that AFC Championship game, or do you blame the coaches? I blame the coaches for abandoning the run. And then Eric DeCosta didn't spend as much last year because he was in the top 3 for the previous 3 years. And at some point you can't keep being the highest cash paying GM. And that's what Howie Roseman is saying here. Like, listen, we just went all the way to the Super Bowl, but now, and by the way, this wasn't even there. I went and listened to his whole press conference. And Howie said, yeah, we could pay guys, but it's got to come from somewhere else. Basically saying, you got to rob Peter to pay Paul. And he goes, hey, like money has to come from somewhere. It's always he sounded exactly like Eric DeCosta. So he took his swing and he hit. Eric DeCosta took his swing and they got knocked out in the AFC Championship game. So, and then this last year, it was turnovers galore. Can you put that on Eric DeCosta? I don't think so. And so I just don't agree with the comparisons that Jason La Canfora is making. I definitely don't agree with him saying that Steve Bisciotti isn't committed. I have been, when I worked there, we always had season year-end reviews, and they kind of showed us the overall view of the Steve Bisciotti's goal is to basically break even every year because he's independently wealthy. He's not making his money from the Ravens. He could go underneath the salary cap every year. He doesn't. He's in the top five of spending most years. Brian McFarland put out other stuff, showed that the Ravens are in the top 10 going all the way back from 2000, I think it was 13 to 17, something like that. Just like the Eagles in the top 10. And so people try to perpetuate the idea that the Ravens are cheap. That is a lie. Whether you look at it from a cap perspective or a cash perspective. Cap perspective, they're always going to cap. And in the cash perspective, they're cyclical just like everybody else. The Eagles will now hit their low cycle. Maybe their draft picks will be able to smooth it over. The Ravens hit their low cycle last year. Seemed to be okay until they turned the ball over repeatedly in the division game. Whatever metric you want to use, the Ravens are not cheap. If you want to be specific, they're cheap at paying veteran wide receivers. And if you want to be specific, they are cheap at paying other people's free agents. It seems cheap because you don't like that they're paying their own. Those are the two places where they don't spend a lot of money, but overall, they are not even close to being a cheap organization.
Seems awfully personal for Jason La Canfora, don't you think?
There's a lot of
if you listen to the tone of his voice, the way that he delivers it, I catch a lot of their show. And Tim and I are good friends. I've had pleasant interactions with Jason. Know Ken very well from my radio days. Speaking of perpetual, it's perpetual negativity from Jason.
I don't listen to it a lot, but that's what I hear.
It's unbelievably, relentlessly negative. And it feels personal. And you want to know why? Because it is. He has a personal vendetta, a personal grudge against Eric DeCosta. That then extends up to Ravens ownership. Clearly, you heard that in the second segment related to Steve Bisciotti. And so where I was going a few minutes ago was that to me reeks of bitterness, of personal, deep-seated stuff from Jason's perspective to the front office, and it comes across as curmudgeonly, it comes across as doom and gloom, and it comes across as just something that is hard to listen to with a full understanding that he's given it to you straight, objectively. We know this guy's been at the height. This guy's been at national levels. He's been to new heights when it comes to this profession as the former, it was CBS, correct? It was NFL Network and CBS?
He did NFL Network and CBS, yes.
Okay, this was before my time in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm. And I first got to know him as an NFL insider, kind of like Ian Rappaport or Garofalo or those kind of guys.
Yeah. And hey, I'm sure you had pleasant interactions. I've had pleasant interactions with him. When he gets in his on-air demeanor in his post-national days, and he's been in the local market with 105.7 The Fan for at least the last, it might be 5 years now, but it's been several years. It comes across as unrelenting. It's unrelenting. And I think that's really damaged his reputation here in town. I do. So those are my thoughts.
Why is there a personal vendetta?
I probably should keep that off the air from what I've been told.
Okay.
But it's my understanding from multiple credible sources that there is a personal vendetta.
Okay.
And it very much affects the way that he broadcasts and the way that he puts together those types of I think doom and gloom is kind of the right way to put it. You know, there's so many different, there's probably several other adjectives that come to mind for it, but yeah, I won't air that dirty laundry, I don't think.